The soldier's boat drew up on a stone beach, on a small island in the Cyclades, and the man who stepped onto Gyaros in the year 65 of the Common Era carried nothing but the clothes he wore and the sentence Nero had passed against him. The island had no fresh water that anyone knew of, no cultivation, no city, and the Romans sent their condemned philosophers there because the place itself was expected to complete the punishment the emperor had begun. Within days of his landing, other exiles and even curious travelers began to arrive on Gyaros to seek him out, and one must ask why anyone would sail toward a rock in the sea to find a man the emperor had already thrown away. The answer is that Musonius Rufus, on his barren island, had begun to dig a well. He found water. Sailors afterward would speak of it. And around the well, he began quite simply to do what he had done in Rome, to teach, to reason aloud with whoever came, to ask what a human being is for, and what may be taken from such a being, and what may not. The philosopher had not been broken by exile. He had, in a manner that his students would later find difficult to describe without a certain awe, ignored it, not defied it, which is a form of attention, ignored it. He continued his life on the island as though the island were merely the next room he had walked into. This is the episode's concern. What Musonius understood about exile and what he taught his students, both those who followed him to Gyaros and those who came after, is the Stoic doctrine that the great catastrophes which fortune imposes upon a life are, in the technical language of the school, indifferents, neither good nor evil in themselves, material for the philosopher to work upon, no more, no less. Let us reflect on what this means and what it cost him to mean it. The Stoic principle at the heart of this episode is the doctrine of the indifference, and specifically its application to the condition of exile. The Stoics divided all things that happen to a person into three categories. There are goods, which is to say virtue, and the actions that proceed from virtue. There are evils, which is to say vice, and the actions that proceed from vice. And there is everything else: wealth, poverty, reputation, obscurity, health, sickness, life, death, homeland, exile. All of these belong to the third category. The Greek word is adiaphora, the things that make no essential difference. One must be careful here because the modern ear hears indifferent and thinks it means unimportant or not worth noticing. That is not the Stoic meaning. An indifferent, in the technical sense, is something whose presence or absence cannot make a human life good or evil. It can make a life more or less convenient. It can make a life more or less pleasant. It cannot make a life a good life, because a good life is the life of a virtuous soul, and a virtuous soul does not depend for its virtue upon whether it eats well or sleeps in its own bed. Musonius put the doctrine sharply in his 9th discourse, which has survived to us and which is titled, in the manuscripts, that exile is not an evil. He argues there, and I quote from the older translation, that exile does not deprive a man of water, or earth, or air, or the sun, or the other planets, or indeed of the company of men, for everywhere and in every way there is opportunity for association with them. And if we should be deprived of some of these things, still we are not to be counted wretched on that account. The wise man knows that his good is within him, and his good is his own reasoning faculty rightly used. Consider what this claim actually asks of the person making it. It is not a stoicism of teeth-gritting endurance. It is not a claim that one should suffer without complaint. or that the pain of losing one's country is somehow made lighter by philosophy. It is a stranger claim. It is the claim that, correctly understood, exile is not a loss of anything that belongs to you. Your country was never yours in the sense in which your reasoning soul is yours. Your house was never yours. Your reputation, your civic standing, your books, your friends in the ordinary sense, all of these things belong to fortune, and fortune has taken them back, as fortune always eventually does. What remains is what fortune cannot touch, and what fortune cannot touch is what Musonius meant when he said that a man in exile is not thereby harmed. The Latin phrase Seneca uses for the same doctrine in a letter written to his own mother during his own exile on Corsica is that no man can be deprived of himself. Nemo sui potest privari. And Musonius, teaching a generation earlier and in Greek, had been saying the same thing to anyone on Gyaros who would listen. We must now speak of who Musonius was and how he came to be standing on that beach. Gaius Musonius Rufus was born in Volsini, in Etruria, sometime in the reign of Tiberius, probably around the year 30 of the Common Era, though the exact date is not preserved. He was of the equestrian order, the second rank of the Roman aristocracy, which meant that he was born into wealth and expected to enter public life. He did not. He turned instead to philosophy, and by the time of Nero's principate, he was known in Rome as one of the leading Stoic teachers of his generation, perhaps the leading one. His students would include Epictetus, who never spoke of him afterward without reverence, and whose discourses preserve much of what we know of his teacher's manner of instruction. It is not too much to say that when we hear Epictetus, we are hearing Musonius filtered through Epictetus, and that the discourses which have shaped Stoic thought for 19 centuries are, in a real sense, an inheritance from the man on Gyaros. He taught in Greek, though he was Roman. This was the custom of philosophers in Rome in that period. Greek was the language of philosophy, as Latin was the language of law and administration, and Musonius, like the other teachers of his time, addressed his students in the older language of the school. His lectures were taken down by his students, and what has survived to us are 21 discourses in more or less complete form, along with a number of fragments and sayings quoted by other authors, principally Stobaeus, the 5th century anthologist to whom we owe so much of what we possess of Musonius at all. The circumstance that brought him to Gyaros was the Pisonian conspiracy of the year 65. A group of senators and equestrians, weary of Nero, had planned to assassinate the emperor and place Gaius Calpurnius Piso on the throne. The conspiracy was betrayed. Nero's reprisals were extensive and, in the ancient historian's judgment, indiscriminate. Seneca, who had been Nero's tutor, was ordered to open his veins. Lucan, the poet, was ordered to do the same, and Musonius, who had been on the fringes of the philosophical opposition without, so far as we can tell, being involved in the conspiracy proper, was exiled. Tacitus, in the Annals, mentions him. Nero, Tacitus writes, drove Musonius Rufus into exile because he was distinguished for his pursuit of philosophy. The proximate charge was association with Rubellius Plautus, a philosophical senator whom Nero had already killed. The real charge, one suspects, was that Musonius was too visible a witness to what a Roman with dignity looked like at a time when Rome was ruled by a man without any, Gyaros. The island is small. It is perhaps 10 square miles in extent. rocky, with poor soil, and in the ancient world it was inhabited only occasionally by a few fishermen who could not make a living elsewhere, and by the exiles the empire sent there. Juvenal, writing a generation later, would use Gyaros as a proverbial name for the place to which the disgraced were consigned. Aude aliquid brevibus Gyaris et carcere dignum, he wrote. Dare to do something worthy of small Gyaros and the prison. To be sent to Gyaros was, in the Roman imagination, to be sent nowhere, to be erased without the trouble of an execution. The island had, as we noted, a water problem. Water on Gyaros was not entirely absent, but it was scarce and, in the ancient reports, brackish. Philostratus, writing in the 3rd century in his Life of Apollonius of Tyana, preserves the tradition that Musonius, being set to dig, found a spring, and that afterward the sailors and travelers who put in at Gyaros drank from Musonius's well and remembered him. The tradition may be embellished, but it captures something essential. The teacher, sent to an island the empire believed to be empty, made the island a place where teaching happened, made it a place with water, made it, in defiance of the entire logic of Nero's sentence, into a school. Musonius was not on Gyaros alone. Other philosophers were sent into exile in the same period, and some came to him. There is a passage preserved in a later source describing how visitors would arrive from the neighboring islands and even from the Greek mainland, seeking the philosopher whom Nero had thought to hide. We are told that Musonius received them, spoke with them, asked them questions in the manner of Socrates, and let them go. The empire had not silenced him. The empire had, if anything, concentrated him. In Rome, he had been one voice among many. On Gyaros, he was the reason people came. He would remain in exile for perhaps 3 years. When Nero died in the year 68, Musonius was recalled. He returned to Rome. He continued to teach. In the year 70, we hear of him again, and here the story becomes stranger still. When the armies of Vespasian were approaching Rome in the civil war that followed Nero's death, Musonius, according to Tacitus, went out to the soldiers and attempted to persuade them by argument of the blessings of peace and the evils of war. The soldiers laughed at him. Some of them, Tacitus says, wanted to strike him, but he was not deterred. He would be exiled a second time, briefly, under Vespasian, though the details are obscure. He would die, we think, sometime in the 80s or early 90s, in Rome, an old man. But it is the years on Gyaros that concern us here, because it was there, on the island, the empire had chosen as the instrument of his destruction that Musonius wrote and taught the doctrine to which we now return. Let us look at how the principle actually functioned in the daily life of a man on a rock in the Aegean. Musonius did not, so far as we can tell from his writings, spend his exile mourning Rome. He did not compose letters begging to be recalled. He did not, in the manner of Ovid on the Black Sea, write elegies of self-pity, though one must say, in Ovid's defense, that Ovid was a poet and elegy was his instrument, whereas Musonius was a philosopher and philosophy was his. Musonius wrote arguments. He wrote his 9th discourse, the one on exile, and he wrote it, we believe, on Gyaros itself, addressed to a fellow exile who was struggling with his condition. The discourse opens by acknowledging the objection. It is hard, the interlocutor says, to be far from one's country and one's friends. Musonius does not deny that it is hard. He does not tell the man that his feelings are illusory. He begins instead by asking what exile actually is. Exile, he says, is being prevented from living in one's own country. Very well. What does one lose by that? One loses, first, the familiar streets and the familiar people. One loses, second, the standing one held there. One loses, third, perhaps, wealth and property, if these were tied to the country. And what does one still have? One has one's body. One has the air and the water and the light of the sun, which are the same on every island as they are in Rome. One has, above all, one's reasoning soul, which is the seat of one's humanity, and which no journey by ship can diminish. He goes further. Many of the greatest men of history, he says, spent much of their lives outside their native cities. Odysseus wandered for 20 years and was not diminished by it. Diogenes lived in Corinth after his own exile from Sinop and did his best philosophical work there. Even the sun, if one may speak so, is a kind of wanderer, moving from one part of the sky to another without shame and without loss. There is a passage in the 9th discourse which I want to read to you carefully because it captures the whole of the argument, and because it was written by a man who was living the argument as he wrote it. The translation I use is the older public domain rendering. Musonius writes, "How then can exile be an obstacle to a man's cultivation of himself, or to the attainment of virtue, when no one has ever been cut off by exile from learning or from doing the things that he ought? On the contrary, exile seems even to contribute to this end, in that it provides men with leisure and a greater opportunity for learning the good and practicing it, inasmuch as they are freed from the distractions that beset them at home." He goes on, "And if it be argued that exile deprives a man of his friends, let us reflect that a true friend is not deprived of us by distance, and a false friend was not our friend to begin with." Now one might read this passage and think it cold or ungrateful for the depth of what has been lost. It is neither. It is precise. Musonius is not saying that he does not miss Rome. He is saying that missing Rome is not the same as being harmed by the absence of Rome. There is a distinction here that the whole of Stoicism turns on. Feelings pass through the philosopher as weather passes through the sky. He does not deny them. He does not indulge them. He asks of each feeling whether the judgment beneath it is a true judgment. And the judgment beneath the grief of exile is the judgment that country is a good in the technical sense, and that its loss is an evil. Musonius's answer is that this judgment is false. Country is an indifferent. Its loss cannot harm the soul, and the soul, correctly instructed, will grieve less as it comes to see this more clearly. The remarkable thing is that we can watch him doing this on the island itself. He does not simply argue the doctrine. He inhabits it. He digs the well. He receives the visitors. He teaches. He is, on Gyaros, exactly the man he was in Rome, minus the accidents of place. The accidents did not, it turns out, contain him. He contained himself. There is a story preserved in Epictetus in the first book of the Discourses, which sheds further light. Epictetus is speaking to his own students, and he recalls a saying of his teacher. Musonius Rufus, he says, used to remark that if you have leisure to pity yourself, you have leisure to do many things. The remark is characteristically dry. The condition of exile, which appears to be a condition of loss, is also and quite exactly a condition of leisure. Musonius on Gyaros had time to think, time to write, time to teach, time to attend to his students in a way that he had never had time to do in Rome. The empire, by removing him from the noise of the capital, had given him the philosopher's most precious resource. Musonius accepted the gift. I do not want to sentimentalize this. Gyaros was hard. The water was scarce even after the well. The food was poor. The winters on those islands are colder than the traveler expects, and the winds off the Aegean in January are a kind of continuous violence. Musonius was not a young man. He would have felt all of it. What he did not do was allow the physical hardship to become metaphysical injury. His body suffered inconveniences. His soul did not. Let me put it another way. There is a passage in Marcus Aurelius, writing more than a century later, but drinking from the same well, which distinguishes between what happens to us and what we make of what happens to us. The event, Marcus says, is one thing. The judgment upon the event is another. Musonius on Gyaros is the man who has taken this distinction and lived inside it. The event, exile, was imposed upon him by Nero. The judgment upon the event was his own to make, and he made it in accordance with the doctrine of his school. Exile is not an evil. It is a change of location, a change of circumstance, a change of what the philosopher has to work with. The philosopher's work continues. What, then, is Musonius teaching you? The lesson is not, I want to be clear, that exile is pleasant, or that hardship should be welcomed, or that one ought to seek out the loss of country and home in order to prove one's philosophical seriousness. Musonius did not seek Gyaros. Gyaros was imposed on him. The lesson lies elsewhere. The lesson is that there is a category error at the root of most human suffering, and that the philosopher's first work is to identify and correct the error. The error runs like this. We assign the status of good to things that are, in truth, indifferent. We say to ourselves, my country is my good, my house is my good, my reputation is my good, my health is my good, my life itself is my good. And having assigned the status of good to these things, we have made ourselves hostages to fortune. We have handed the keys of our happiness to accidents, because these things, all of them, can be taken from us. And when they are taken, we experience the loss as though a piece of our soul had been amputated, when in truth, what has been amputated was never a piece of our soul at all. Musonius on Gyaros is teaching, by the fact of his composure, that the amputation was an illusion. The soul is intact. The soul remains intact through every loss that fortune can inflict, provided only that the soul has not confused itself with the things it possessed. This is why Musonius could dig a well and receive students. He had not lost himself. He had lost only Rome, and Rome had never been him. There is a further point, and it is subtler. Musonius does not merely endure Gyaros, he works Gyaros. The island becomes material. The well is dug. The students are taught. The discourses are written. This is what the Stoics meant when they said that the wise man is happy on the rack, a saying that has always sounded absurd to the ordinary hearer. They did not mean that pain is pleasant. They meant that even the rack is material upon which the philosopher may act. The rack does not act upon him. He acts upon the rack by choosing his response to it, by displaying in his response the virtue that was always the only true good. You will notice that this teaching cuts against much of what surrounds you. You are told, and have been told all your life, that the good life consists in the accumulation of favorable circumstances: health, prosperity, standing, security, love. Assemble enough of these, the surrounding culture whispers, and you will have arrived. Musonius answers that the assembly can never be completed because fortune will disassemble it faster than you can build. And even were it completed, it would not be the good life, because the good life is not made of circumstances. The good life is made of a soul rightly ordered, and a soul rightly ordered can be constructed on Gyaros with the same materials as in Rome, or in a palace, or in a prison, or in any place at all where a human being still has the use of his own reason. This is why Musonius could not be broken by Nero. Nero could take Rome from him. Nero could take his students, his library, his familiar rooms, his position, his income. Nero could not take the one thing Musonius had spent his life building, which was his own capacity to reason well about what was happening to him. That capacity went with him onto the ship. It stepped ashore with him on Gyaros. It bent over the ground where the well would be. It spoke to the visitors who came seeking a philosopher. And when Nero died and Musonius was recalled, the same capacity walked back onto the mainland. It had never left him because it could never leave him. It was him. The wise man knows, Musonius would say, that his good is within him. Everything else may come, everything else may go. He is not diminished by the arrival, and he is not diminished by the departure. He is what he was. He does what he did. And if the empire builds a wall around him, he digs a well inside the wall and continues. I want to leave you with a question, and I want to ask you to sit with it for longer than the length of this episode. The question is this: what have you assigned to the category of good in your own life, which properly belongs to the category of indifferent? Not what should be indifferent to you in the sense of not mattering. Musonius did not stop caring about Rome. He simply stopped believing that Rome was necessary to his being himself. There is a difference. The question is, where in your life have you confused a preference for a need? Where have you told yourself that a certain circumstance must obtain in order for you to be who you are, when in truth, the circumstance is only the room you happen to be standing in, and you would still be you in another room? I am not asking you to answer quickly. The Stoics did not believe in quick answers to questions of this kind. They believed in a lifelong practice of examining one's judgments, one at a time, and asking of each whether it corresponds to what is actually the case. Musonius spent his years on Gyaros doing precisely this work in slow conversation with himself and with the visitors who came to him. He did not finish the work. No one finishes the work. He continued in it until he died, and the discourses that have come down to us are fragments of a labor that was never intended to be complete. You may find, if you sit with the question, that the room you are most afraid of losing is not, in fact, you. That the position, the relationship, the possession, the reputation, the very body, none of these is what you have been calling by your own name. That your own name refers to something more durable and stranger and quieter than the circumstances that surround it. This is what Musonius found on the island. It was not a doctrine he had read in a book, though he had read it in many books. It was something he verified with his own life, when his own life had been reduced to the minimum, and the minimum turned out to be enough. The well he dug on Gyaros is gone, if it ever existed in the form the tradition remembers. The island is still there, small and rocky, and mostly uninhabited as it was in his day. The discourses remain. The student, Epictetus, wrote down what he had learned, and Epictetus' student, Arrian, wrote down what Epictetus said, and the chain has come, by many hands and much accident, to you. That chain is longer than any empire. Nero is a name now, and not much more. Musonius is a voice still. Consider what that means, about which of the two men was truly powerful. And consider, when next you feel that some circumstance of your life is about to unmake you, whether it is the circumstance that has the power to unmake you, or only your judgment about the circumstance. The judgment, unlike the circumstance, is yours to correct. That is where we end.